The sky was the wrong color long before anyone admitted something had gone wrong. It shimmered in fractured bands of pale violet and burning gold, as if the atmosphere itself had been stretched too thin and was trying to hold together out of sheer stubbornness. Thesara stood at the edge of the evacuation corridor, her long ears angled slightly back. Not out of fear, she told herself, but because the noise was unbearable. Sirens pulsed through the air in uneven rhythms, and the distant roar of descending carriers made the ground hum beneath her boots. She was not supposed to be there alone. Someone had been assigned to stay with her, to guide her, to remind her of things like protocol and safety, and not wandering into active evacuation zones. That someone had disappeared the moment the first transport doors opened and people began to run. Thesara decided that was either a failure of duty or an impressive display of self-preservation. She had not yet decided which she respected more. A human boy stumbled into her line of sight, nearly colliding with a hovering crate that adjusted itself just in time to avoid being kicked. He looked about her age, though humans were harder to read. His hair was uneven, as if it had lost an argument with a blade, and his expression suggested he had recently discovered that the universe did not, in fact, operate according to any fair or reasonable rules. He stopped when he saw her, not because she was particularly intimidating, she was small after all, but because she was standing very still while everything else was in motion. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, 2 points of quiet in a field of chaos. "You're not running," he said, as if this were a deeply suspicious activity. "I am evaluating," Thesara replied, lifting her chin slightly. It sounded more impressive than saying she did not know where to go. He considered this, then nodded once. "Right, evaluating. That's what I was doing before I tripped over that crate." The crate gave a soft mechanical chirp, which Thesara chose to interpret as offense. Another wave of sound rolled overhead as a carrier descended, its massive hull casting shifting shadows across the corridor. The ground vibrated more intensely now, and the air tasted faintly metallic, like the edge of a storm that had already decided to arrive. "You should probably evaluate faster," the boy added. "They said the last transport isn't waiting." Thesara glanced toward the docking platform, where figures moved in hurried lines, their shapes blurring together in urgency. She knew what she was supposed to do. She knew the route, the protocols, the expected behavior of someone in her position. But knowing and moving were not the same thing, and for a brief, unwelcome moment, her feet refused to agree with her thoughts. The boy shifted awkwardly, then looked down at his hands as if hoping they might offer a solution. Instead, he found a thin strip of metal looped loosely around his fingers, something he had been twisting absent-mindedly. It caught the light in a dull, uneven way, clearly not meant to be anything in particular. He held it up. "I was trying to fix this," he said, as if continuing a conversation they had never started. "But I think I made it worse." Thesara stepped closer before she could reconsider, drawn by the small, ordinary object in a moment that felt anything but ordinary. She took it from him without asking, her movements precise despite the noise around them. The metal was slightly warm, shaped unevenly, but not without intention. "It is not worse," as she said after a moment. "It is different." "That's what people say when it's worse," he replied. She ignored that, focusing instead on the way the strip bent under her fingers. With a careful motion, she adjusted it, narrowing the loop, smoothing one edge against another. It was not perfect. She did not have the tools for that. But it held its shape better now, something closer to a ring than a mistake. She placed it back into his hand, then paused. For reasons she could not explain, the moment felt incomplete. "Give me your hand," she said. He blinked. "That sounds like the start of a bad decision." "Your hand," she repeated more firmly. He extended it, albeit with the cautious expression of someone who fully expected to regret this. Thesara took it, her grip steady, and slid the ring onto his finger. It was too large at first, slipping slightly, so she adjusted it again, pressing the metal just enough that it held. "There," she said. He stared at it. "Okay. I did not expect that outcome." "It is yours," she added, as if that clarified everything. "It was already mine, Mima," he pointed out. "It is more yours now." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, apparently deciding that arguing with her logic would require more time than either of them had. Instead, he gave a small, uncertain nod. All right, he said. More mine. Got it. Another announcement echoed through the corridor, louder this time, sharper. Final boarding. The words cut through the noise with an urgency that could not be ignored. The boy glanced toward the transport, then back at her. You're coming, right? Because I feel like evaluating has reached its conclusion. Thassara hesitated for only a second this time. Then she stepped forward. Yes, she said. The years did not arrive all at once. They assembled themselves slowly, like pieces of a structure no one noticed until it was already standing. Jorn learned early that survival did not require elegance, only persistence, and a willingness to accept that most plans would fail in ways that were, at best, mildly embarrassing. The first colony he settled in had gravity that fluctuated just enough to make walking feel like a suggestion. The second had water that tasted faintly like metal and regret. The third had a perfectly stable atmosphere, but a population that believed all off-worlders were secretly inspectors sent to judge their cooking. He stayed there the longest. You're still holding it wrong, a woman told him one afternoon as he attempted to repair a food synthesizer that had developed a personality disorder. It's not wrong, Jorn said, crouched beside the machine. It's interpretive. The machine beeped in a way that sounded offended. The woman crossed her arms. It just tried to make soup out of a shoe. That was a test, he replied. You want a machine that's willing to think outside the box. I don't want it thinking at all, she said. I want it making soup that isn't footwear. Jorn sighed, wiping his hands on his jacket before glancing down at the ring on his finger. It had been adjusted so many times it barely resembled its original shape, but it held together. It always did. He tapped it lightly against the side of the machine, as if it might offer some kind of mechanical wisdom. All right, he muttered. Let's try this again. The machine hummed, considered its life choices, and finally produced something that looked vaguely edible. The woman stared at it. Is that soup? It's confident, Jorn said. That's a good start. She narrowed her eyes. You're not charging me for this. I wasn't going to, he replied quickly. I value repeat customers who survive the first attempt. She snorted, shaking her head as she walked away. Jorn allowed himself a small grin, then leaned back against the wall, letting the quiet settle in. It never lasted. News traveled fast across systems, faster than most ships, and rarely with any interest in accuracy. By the time it reached Jaren, it had already been reshaped into something dramatic. Trade routes collapsing, border tensions rising, entire sectors negotiating with the kind of urgency that suggested someone had finally realized problems did not fix themselves if ignored long enough. He listened to it all with half an ear, more focused on the immediate concerns of keeping things running, keeping himself fed, and occasionally remembering to sleep. War? His friend Talon said one evening, dropping into the chair across from him with exaggerated exhaustion. Do you think it'll be a big one or a small one? Jorn looked up from the device he was dismantling. Those are terrible options. Welcome to reality, Talon replied. Pick one. I pick none, Jorn said. Talon laughed. Bold strategy, historically ineffective. Jorn shrugged, twisting a component loose with careful precision. The ring caught the light briefly, a familiar glint that had long since blended into the background of his life. You ever think about leaving? Talon asked after a moment. I am always thinking about leaving, Jorn said. The problem is deciding where to go that isn't already in the process of becoming worse. That's optimistic. It's realistic, he corrected. Talon leaned forward, eyeing the ring. You still have that thing. Jorn glanced at it, as if noticing it for the first time that day. Yeah. You ever figure out where it came from? He hesitated, not because he did not know, but because the answer felt incomplete every time he tried to say it out loud. Someone gave it to me, he said finally, a long time ago. That's not very detailed. It's accurate, Jorn replied. Talon tilted his head. You don't remember anything else? Jorn frowned slightly, the memory surfacing in fragments. Noise. Light. A girl standing very still while everything else moved. Long ears, though that detail always felt strange, like something added later by his mind trying to make sense of it. She said I was evaluating, he said slowly. Talon blinked. That doesn't sound like a normal conversation. It wasn't a normal day, Joran said. Talon leaned back, considering this. So you've been carrying around a mysterious ring from a mysterious girl who used words like evaluating, and you never thought that might be important? Joran looked at him. Important how? I don't know, Talon admitted. Destiny? Secret royalty? Hidden message? At the very least, a decent story to impress someone. Joran huffed a quiet laugh. If that was the goal, it failed. No one is impressed by a bent piece of metal and a half-remembered conversation. Talon pointed at the ring. I'm a little impressed. You have low standards. That's why we're friends, Talon said cheerfully. Joran shook his head, returning his attention to the device in his hands. The conversation drifted, as most of them did, into something lighter, something easier to manage. But later, when the room had emptied and the noise had settled into a distant hum, he found himself staring at the ring again. He turned it slightly, feeling the worn edges, the places where it had been reshaped and repaired. It had outlasted more than it had any right to. He had lost tools, ships, entire places he had once called home. But the ring remained. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. Still here, he murmured. The ring, as usual, did not respond, but for reasons he could not quite explain, that felt like an answer. The message arrived in the middle of something that should not have been complicated. Joran was halfway inside an access panel, one arm buried up to the elbow in a tangle of fiber conduits, when his communicator began to vibrate with the kind of urgency usually reserved for bad decisions and unpaid debts. If that's another parts supplier, he muttered, twisting a connector into place, tell them I'm already disappointed. The communicator did not respond, which was rude but not unexpected. He pulled himself free from the panel, bumping his head lightly against the edge on the way out. Great, he added under his breath. Now it's personal. Talon, who had been observing from a safe distance that suggested experience, glanced over. You going to answer that, or are we pretending problems disappear if ignored long enough? I've been using that strategy for years, Joran said, wiping his hands. It has a surprisingly high success rate. The communicator buzzed again, louder this time, as if it had developed opinions. Fine, Joran sighed, tapping it open. If this is about the missing shipment, I can explain. The voice that answered was calm, precise, and entirely unfamiliar. Joran Vey. He froze. Talon raised an eyebrow. That depends, Joran said slowly. Is this a conversation I want to be part of? You have been selected, the voice continued, ignoring the question with impressive confidence, as a civilian technical representative for the upcoming Interstellar Negotiations Summit on Kareth Prime. Joran blinked, then blinked again, as if the message might correct itself. I think you have the wrong person, he said. We do not, the voice replied. That seems unlikely, Joran insisted. Have you seen my file? Yes. And you still chose me? Yes. Talon leaned closer, whispering loudly. Ask if they're desperate. Joran waved him off, though the question felt relevant. I fix things, Joran said into the communicator. Mostly small things, occasionally medium things. Never anything that requires diplomacy. You have experience with multi-species systems, the voice said. I once repaired a food synthesizer that was trying to start a philosophical debate, Joran replied. I don't think that qualifies. There was a brief pause, the kind that suggested someone, somewhere, was deciding whether this was a joke. It qualifies, the voice said finally. Joran stared at the communicator. That's concerning. You are to report within 48 standard hours. Transportation will be provided. And if I say no? Another pause, slightly longer this time. That would be inadvisable. Joran considered this. That sounds like a polite threat. It is a factual statement. Right, he said, even better. The line went silent before he could argue further, the connection ending with a soft click that felt far too final. Joran lowered the communicator slowly. Talon waited exactly 2 seconds before speaking. So, he said, we're definitely going to Kareth Prime, aren't we? We are not going to Kareth Prime, Joran said firmly. Excellent, Talon replied. I'll start packing. I just said we're not going. And I just said I'm packing, Talon said. These things can both be true. Jorn rubbed his temples. This is a mistake. Absolutely, Talon agreed, but it's the kind of mistake that comes with free transportation, which is my favorite kind. Jorn glanced down at his hand, the ring catching the light as he flexed his fingers. For a moment, he considered the idea of leaving it all behind. Again, another place, another system, another set of problems that would eventually catch up to him. Then he sighed. 48 hours, he muttered. Talon grinned. I knew it. I didn't agree, Jorn said. You didn't refuse, Talon countered. That's basically the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's the beginning of the same thing, Talon corrected. Jorn looked around the small workshop, at the scattered tools, the half-finished repairs, the familiar chaos that somehow made sense to him. Leaving it felt inconvenient, not impossible, just inconvenient in a way that suggested the universe was about to complicate his life more than usual. All right, he said finally. We go. We listen. We try not to accidentally insult anyone important. Talon nodded. That seems reasonable. And then we leave, Jorn added. Of course, Talon said. Immediately after something goes terribly wrong, Jorn pointed at him. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid. Then you definitely shouldn't go, Talon said. Jorn stared at him for a moment, then shook his head, a reluctant smile slipping through despite himself. Help me pack, he said. Now you're talking, Talon replied, already moving. Hours later, as the station lights dimmed into their artificial night cycle, Jorn stood alone for a moment, the noise of preparation fading into the background. He turned the ring slightly on his finger, the familiar weight grounding him in a way he did not question anymore. Kareth Prime, he murmured. The name felt distant, like something from a story he had not meant to be part of. He exhaled slowly, then straightened, the decision settling into place whether he liked it or not. All right, he said quietly. Let's see how bad this gets. The station above Kareth Prime did not look like something built for negotiation. It looked like something built to remind visitors that leaving was optional, but not guaranteed. Jorn stood just inside the arrival corridor, staring up at a ceiling that seemed to shift depending on how long you looked at it. Panels of translucent alloy rippled with slow-moving light, like a controlled storm trapped behind glass. He tilted his head slightly. I'm already uncomfortable, he said. Talon, standing beside him with a bag slung over one shoulder, nodded approvingly. Good. That means it's working. A line of officials moved past them with the kind of efficiency that suggested no one here had ever tripped over a crate in their life. Jorn watched them for a moment, then glanced down at his own boots. I feel underdressed, he added. You are underdressed, Talon said. That man just walked by in something that looked like it cost more than an entire colony. Jorn squinted. It also looked like it might attack him if he breathes wrong. That's probably a feature. They were guided firmly, but politely, through a series of corridors that seemed designed to be impressive first and navigable second. Walls curved in ways that made straight lines feel like a memory, and the air carried a faint, clean scent that Jorn suspected was either very expensive or entirely artificial. Try not to touch anything, Talon murmured. I wasn't going to. You're looking at that panel like you want to fix it. It's slightly misaligned, Jorn said quietly. It is not your responsibility. It could be, Talon sighed. Focus. We are here to not cause problems. I am excellent at that, Jorn said. You are historically terrible at that. They were separated shortly after. Talon redirected with a sympathetic nod that suggested he would not be allowed near anything important. Jorn was escorted toward the central negotiation chamber, his footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. The doors opened without sound. Inside, the room was vast but not empty. A long table stretched across the center, its surface smooth and reflective, mirroring the subtle movements of those already seated. Representatives from multiple systems occupied their positions, each carrying their own version of tension, of expectation. Jorn paused just long enough to consider turning around. Then he stepped inside. A figure entered from the opposite side at the same moment. The shift was immediate, though no one spoke of it. Conversation stilled just slightly, attention redirecting without appearing to do so. Jorn followed the movement instinctively, his gaze lifting and stopping. She moved with a controlled precision that felt less like walking and more like the deliberate placement of something important. Her appearance was striking in a way that resisted easy description. At a glance, she looked human. Refined features, pale skin, composed expression. But the illusion ended at her ears, long and elegantly shaped, marking her as something distinctly other. Joran blinked. Right, he muttered under his breath. No pressure. She took her place at the head of the table, her posture effortless, her presence settling over the room like a quiet command. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly without needing volume. We begin. Joran found his seat, trying very hard to remember how chairs worked. He adjusted slightly, then stopped adjusting, deciding that any further movement would only make things worse. The discussion unfolded with careful structure, each statement measured, each response deliberate. Trade agreements, territorial boundaries, resource allocations, all of it presented with a level of precision that made Joran feel like he had accidentally wandered into a conversation he was not qualified to understand. He leaned slightly toward the representative beside him. Is it too late to pretend I'm not here? The man did not look at him. Yes. Good, Joran said. I prefer clarity. He kept his focus where it was expected, following the flow of conversation, contributing only when directly addressed. It was manageable, uncomfortable, but manageable. Until it wasn't. It happened in a moment so small it should not have mattered. He shifted his hand slightly on the table, adjusting his position, and the light caught the ring. Across the room, Tessera's gaze paused. It did not linger long enough for anyone else to notice. It did not disrupt her composure or alter the steady cadence of her voice. But for that fraction of a second, the world narrowed. The ring. It was not as it had been. It had been altered, worn, reshaped by time and use. But it was unmistakable. Her expression did not change. She continued speaking, her tone even, her posture unchanged. If anything, she became more precise, more controlled, as if tightening the boundaries of herself. Joran, unaware, leaned back slightly, then immediately corrected himself, sitting upright again. Still doing great, he whispered to himself. The representative beside him exhaled slowly, possibly in response, possibly in despair. Tessera's gaze returned to the discussion, to the shifting dynamics of negotiation, to the careful balance she had maintained for years. But the memory had already surfaced. A corridor, a sky breaking apart. A boy holding something that had not yet become what it was now. Her hand tightened slightly against the edge of the table, the movement subtle enough to pass unnoticed. Joran spoke when prompted, his words straightforward, unpolished but effective in their simplicity. He did not dress them in diplomacy. He did not shape them into something they were not. At one point he paused, glancing briefly at the intricate display embedded in the table. This might be a stupid question, he said, but if we're trying to stabilize the trade routes, wouldn't it be easier to fix the relay stations first? A silence followed, not hostile, not entirely, just surprised. One of the delegates shifted. The relay stations are under dispute. Right, Joran said, but they're also broken. Another pause. Joran gestured lightly. I mean, I could be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time. But usually when something isn't working, step one is making it work. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then unexpectedly, it shifted. Tessera inclined her head slightly. Clarify. Joran blinked, then straightened. The stations aren't just contested. They're unstable. You're negotiating over something that can't hold the agreement you're trying to build. The room adjusted around that idea, the conversation redirecting, subtle but real. Tessera watched him as he spoke, not as a queen observing a delegate, as something else, something quieter, something unresolved. Joran finished, then leaned back slightly, immediately catching himself again. Sorry, he added. That might have been obvious. No, Tessera said, her voice steady. It was not. He nodded once, satisfied with that. And still, he did not notice the way her attention lingered, just slightly, just enough, on the ring. The room adjusted around Joran's suggestion in ways that were subtle enough to pretend nothing had changed, yet obvious enough that everyone felt it. Holographic projections shifted above the table, replacing abstract territorial lines with the skeletal framework of relay stations scattered across contested space. Their structures flickered with warning indicators: instability, overload, partial collapse. Joran leaned forward slightly, squinting. "Yeah," he muttered, half to himself. "That one's definitely about to fail." A delegate across from him frowned. "On what basis are you making that assessment?" Joran gestured toward the display. "It's blinking." "That is a diagnostic signal." "Right," Joran said. "And it's blinking like it's about to have a breakdown." There was a pause, the kind that hovered between dismissal and reluctant consideration. Tessara did not look at the projection. She was looking at him, not openly, not in a way that would draw attention, but her focus remained just off-center, as if the conversation had two layers, one spoken, one remembered. "Continue," she said. Joran blinked. "You want me to keep talking?" "Yes." "That seems risky," he said. A faint shift passed through the room. Not quite laughter, but something close enough to soften the edge of tension. Joran exhaled, running a hand briefly through his hair before refocusing on the display. The ring caught the light again, briefly, almost casually. Tessara's hand remained still on the table. "All right," he said. "If you stabilize the relays first, you're not arguing over something that might fall apart the second you agree on it. Fix the foundation, then fight about who owns it." "That is a simplification," another delegate said. "It's supposed to be," Joran replied. "Complicated things break more often." "That is not a recognized principle." "It should be," he said. There was a pause again, but this one held less resistance. Tessara inclined her head slightly. "Assign a preliminary evaluation team." The words carried weight. The shift was immediate. What had been a suggestion became a directive, the conversation reorganizing itself around that decision. Joran leaned back, then caught himself again, sitting upright with a small sigh. "I think I just did something important," he whispered. The delegate beside him did not look at him. "You did." "I don't know how I feel about that." "You will adapt." "That sounds like a threat." "It is encouragement." Joran nodded slowly. "I prefer the threats. They're more honest." The session continued, but something had changed beneath the surface. The tension was still there, but it had loosened slightly, like a knot that had been pulled just enough to breathe. Tessara maintained her composure, her voice steady, her decisions precise. No one watching her would have seen anything unusual, but her awareness had shifted. The ring. It remained where it had always been, on his hand, worn, reshaped, but undeniably the same. She had told herself it was lost. She had told herself he was lost. Both had been easier to accept than the alternative. Joran, unaware of any of this, was now carefully trying not to touch anything on the table. "I feel like if I press the wrong thing," he murmured, "something explodes." "It will not explode," the delegate beside him said. "That is exactly what something that might explode would want me to believe." The delegate closed his eyes briefly. Across the table, one of the representatives shifted, addressing Tessara directly. "Your decision assumes cooperation across disputed sectors." "It assumes necessity," Tessara replied. "Those are not the same. They become the same when alternatives fail." The exchange was sharp, controlled, balanced on the edge of disagreement. Tessara held it there, neither escalating nor retreating, guiding it with the precision of someone who understood exactly how far to push. Joran watched, impressed despite himself. "She's good," he whispered. The delegate beside him did not respond. Joran leaned slightly closer. "No, really, that was... I don't even know what that was, but it worked." "It is called leadership." "I should try that sometime," Joran said. "You should not." "Fair." The discussion moved forward, branching into logistics, timelines, contingencies. Joran contributed when asked, his answers direct, occasionally inconvenient, but rarely ignored now. At one point he hesitated, then raised a hand slightly. "I have another question," he said. Several heads turned. He immediately regretted everything. "Or not," he added quickly. "We can skip it." "Speak," Tessara said. Joran inhaled slowly. "If we're stabilizing the relays, who's actually doing the work?" A pause. Joint teams, someone answered. Joran nodded. Right. And they're all going to agree on how to fix things? Another pause. Joran spread his hands slightly. Because in my experience, if you put 3 engineers in a room, you get 5 opinions and at least 1 argument about tools. A faint ripple passed through the room again. Unexpected, unwelcome perhaps, but not entirely resisted. Tessara's gaze remained steady. Then they will learn to agree, she said. Joran considered that. That sounds optimistic. It is necessary. Right, he said. Same thing again. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in her expression. Not enough to be called a smile. Not enough for anyone to name. But it was there. The session continued, the structure holding, the balance maintained. And through it all, Tessara's awareness remained divided. Between the present and the memory that refused to stay where she had left it. The session ended without resolution, which according to everyone involved, meant it had gone well. Joran stepped out into the corridor with the slow, careful movements of someone who had spent too long pretending to understand things. He exhaled deeply. I didn't start a war, he said to himself. That feels like success. Moderate success, Talon replied from a nearby wall, where he had been leaning in a way that suggested he had been waiting for this exact moment. You did, however, suggest that half the infrastructure is broken. It is broken, Joran said. That's not the issue, Talon said. The issue is that you said it out loud. Joran frowned. That's how problems get fixed. That's how people get invited to more meetings, Talon corrected. Joran paused. I regret everything. You say that now, Talon said. Wait until they ask you to lead something. They wouldn't do that. They absolutely would. Joran opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. They might, he admitted. Talon nodded, satisfied. Growth. A quiet tone echoed through the corridor, subtle but distinct. Joran's communicator vibrated once, then displayed a single line of text. Remain. Private clarification requested. He stared at it. That's not ominous at all, he said. Talon leaned over his shoulder. Who's it from? Joran tilted the display slightly. Talon read it, then went very still. Oh, Talon said. Oh, Joran repeated. That's the Queen. Joran blinked. Right. Of course it is. Talon stepped back immediately. I am suddenly very busy elsewhere. You don't have anywhere else to be. I will find somewhere, Talon said, already moving away. Good luck. Try not to offend her. I don't plan to. Talon was gone. Joran looked down at the message again, then back at the corridor, as if hoping it might offer an alternative. It did not. All right, he muttered. Private clarification. That sounds harmless. It did not sound harmless. He followed the directions provided, moving through a quieter section of the station where the architecture shifted again, becoming less grand, more controlled. The lights were softer here, the air still, as if the space itself had decided to lower its voice. A door opened before he reached it. Of course it did. Joran stepped inside. The room was simple compared to the negotiation chamber, though simple still meant more advanced than anything he had spent significant time in. A wide viewport stretched across one wall, revealing the slow curve of Kareth Prime below, its surface glowing with scattered lights. She stood near the center of the room, not seated, not behind a table, just standing, as if this space required less distance. Joran stopped a few steps inside, suddenly aware of his hands, his posture, the fact that he had not prepared for this in any meaningful way. Hi, he said. He immediately regretted it. Tessara turned slightly toward him, her expression composed, her presence as controlled as it had been in the chamber. But here, without the structure of the negotiation around them, something felt different. Joran Vey, she said. That's me, he replied. Still. A brief pause followed, not uncomfortable, but not entirely easy either. You contributed effectively, she said. Joran nodded. I try to keep my mistakes useful. That is not a standard approach. It's efficient, he said. Another pause. Joran shifted his weight slightly, resisting the urge to look anywhere but at her. It was difficult, not because she was intimidating, though she was, but because there was a sense of being observed in a way that went beyond the present moment. like she was trying to place him somewhere. I was told there was a clarification, he said. There is, Thesara replied. She stepped closer, not abruptly, not in a way that would startle, but enough that the space between them changed. Her gaze dropped, briefly, to his hand. Jorn followed the movement instinctively, glancing down at the ring as if it might explain something. It did not. Where did you get that? She asked. The question was quiet, direct. Jorn blinked, caught slightly off guard. This? He said, lifting his hand slightly. It's, nothing special. Answer the question. There was no force in her tone, but there was no room to avoid it either. Jorn hesitated, not because he did not want to answer, but because the answer felt incomplete in a way he had never fully resolved. A long time ago, he said slowly, during an evacuation. Thesara did not move. Someone gave it to me, he continued. I don't remember everything. It was loud, confusing. I think I was mostly trying not to get stepped on. A faint shift passed through her expression. So you kept it, she said. Jorn shrugged slightly. It was the last thing anyone gave me before everything changed. He turned the ring absently, the worn metal catching the light. Seemed like a good reason, he added. Silence settled between them, not empty, just full. Jorn glanced up again, meeting her gaze. There was something there now, something he could not quite name. Not authority, not distance, recognition. Why? He asked before he could stop himself. Thesara held his gaze for a moment longer, then stepped back slightly, restoring the space between them. It is relevant, she said. That's not an answer. It is sufficient. Jorn exhaled softly. You're very good at that. At what? Answering questions without actually answering them. A pause, then, unexpectedly. I have had practice, she said. Jorn huffed a quiet laugh, the tension easing just enough to breathe. Yeah, he said. I noticed. Another silence followed, but this one was different, less sharp, more uncertain. Jorn shifted slightly, glancing once more at the ring, then back at her. Well, he said, if that's the clarification. It is not, Thesara said. He blinked. Then what is? She did not answer immediately, and for the first time since he had met her, she hesitated. The silence did not break on its own. Jorn waited, shifting his weight slightly, then immediately regretting the movement as it echoed louder than it should have in a room designed for quiet conversations that carried too much meaning. Okay, he said gently. I feel like we've reached the part where something important is about to happen. Thesara did not respond right away. She stepped closer again, but slower this time, as if the distance itself had become something she needed to measure carefully. Her gaze remained on his hand, on the ring that had outlived its origin. I gave it to you, she said. Jorn blinked. Right, he said. I mean, wait. The words took a moment to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. You gave it to me? He repeated. Yes. He looked down at the ring again, turning it slightly as if expecting it to confirm the statement. It did not. That doesn't sound right, he said. It is, Thesara replied. Jorn frowned, searching through the fragments of memory he had never quite assembled. The corridor, the noise. The girl who had insisted she was evaluating while everything else fell apart. The ears. His gaze lifted slowly. Oh, that was you, he said. Thesara inclined her head once. It was. Jorn stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. Well, he said, that explains why it never made sense. A faint shift passed through her expression, not quite confusion. Explain. I always thought it was just he gestured vaguely. A moment, you know, something small, random. It was not random. Yeah, Jorn said. I'm starting to get that. He leaned back slightly, then caught himself, standing upright again with a quiet sigh. You've changed, he added. That is expected. No, I mean, he paused, reconsidering. You're exactly how I remember, which is strange because I barely remember anything. That is contradictory. I am aware, Jorn said. It's been bothering me for years. Thesara studied him in silence. something softer beneath the surface now, something that had not been there before the words were spoken. "You kept it," she said again. Jorn glanced at the ring, then shrugged lightly. "Yeah. Why?" He hesitated, not because the answer was difficult, but because it felt too simple. "Because it was mine," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "You said that before." "I meant it before," he replied. "I just didn't know why." He turned the ring again, the metal catching the light in a familiar way. "It was the only thing that stayed," he continued. "Places changed. People disappeared. Things broke." He glanced up at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I fix a lot of things, but most of them don't stay fixed." A brief pause. "This did." The words settled between them, quiet but solid. Tessara stepped closer once more, close enough now that the space between them felt intentional rather than distant. "It was not meant to be anything," she said. Joran nodded. "Yeah. I told myself that for years." "That also sounds like something people say when it definitely meant something," he replied. For a moment she did not answer. Then, "Yes." Joran exhaled, a soft laugh escaping despite the weight of the moment. "Good. I was worried I was reading this completely wrong." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her expression. It was brief, controlled, but real. "I did not expect you to keep it," she said. "I didn't expect to keep it either," Joran admitted. "It just happened." "That is not a plan." "No," he said, "but it worked." Silence returned, but it was no longer heavy, just steady. Outside the viewport, the planet turned slowly, its surface alive with movement, with systems that continued regardless of the decisions made above them. Joran glanced toward it, then back at her. "So," he said, "what happens now?" Tessara followed his gaze briefly, then returned it to him. "The negotiations continue," she said. "Of course they do. They will be more stable. Because of the relay stations." "Yes," Joran nodded. "Good. I like it when things don't collapse immediately after I fix them. They will require oversight." "That sounds like more meetings." "It does." He winced slightly. "I was afraid of that." A pause, then, "You will remain," Tessara said. Joran blinked. "That sounds less like a suggestion." "It is not." He considered that, then sighed. "All right," he said, "but if I'm staying, I have conditions." Her expression remained neutral. "State them." "Fewer meetings," he said, "better food, and someone explains why half the systems here are designed to look impressive instead of functional." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed her features. "Noted." "I feel like none of that is going to happen." "It will not," she said. "Yeah," Joran replied. "That tracks." They stood there for a moment longer, the conversation settling into something quieter, something that did not need to be filled. Joran adjusted his stance slightly, more comfortable now, less uncertain. "You know," he said, "if you had told me 25 years ago that this was how things would turn out, I probably would have asked for better shoes. That would not have changed the outcome. It might have improved the journey," he said. A brief pause. Then, unexpectedly, "I will consider it," Tessara said. Joran smiled, small but genuine. "Good," he said. The ring remained where it had always been, no longer just a piece of metal shaped by chance, but something defined by time, by memory, by two lives that had crossed once, and, against all reasonable expectation, found their way back. And this time, neither of them let it pass.